Hello. Today's episode will be about DOS shells or DOS file managers. In many ways, users found a solution to access files and use them in a much more efficient manner because those commands are kind of cumbersome. You have to use various instructions, various commands, and complex syntax in order to create a directory, delete a directory if some files are in it, and make all sorts of other operations, including renaming and so on. And developers soon found an interesting market in users that wanted to have a much more accessible system. And this was also good not only for beginners but also for professional users. So those shells or those file managers were a very important part of DOS history and DOS is heritage. And I would like to present some of them of the most successful DOS shells I found during a long period of time that I experienced them. Some DOS shells are going to be presented in a brief way, some in a much more extended way. What matters, however, is the fact that most of these DOS shells had their golden time, if you want to say so, before the mass adoption of Microsoft Windows and other graphical user interfaces. And this is an important fact because by 1995, almost everything pertaining to DOS was already on a declining path. However, before that point, I think from around 1987, 1988 and up until 1995, it was the golden time for those applications. And most of them got much more complex in their functionality and they brought many advantages. Basically, what each and every DOS shell or DOS file manager achieved was better organizing files and folders and having some ways of checking their content. And this was extremely important because without any sort of help from applications, you would only see files as you notice in this screen, or you would have some basic file editing that would be mostly like the ability to modify a document line by line using headline and other applications. So considering those features were very limited, specific applications have been created for editing those text files, for editing images and so on, and organizing them and launching them in a way that was at least semi-automatic was very important. And this was the way in which we used computer back then if we didn't have Windows. And many users, of course, didn't have access to Windows. So having things like those menus and those file managers was a way to make the computer much more easier to be used and much more efficient. So I think that I presented enough in the case of this introduction, so let's move on and see some of these. Alright, the first one I'm going to show to you is DOS Navigator. DOS Navigator is a very interesting program, not because it was the first one, actually I think Norton Commander was the first shell, but because DOS Navigator is one of the DOS shells that has been quite well remembered. First of all, because it was cheaper than Norton Commander, and due to some other reasons pertaining to its attractivity. So let's start DOS Navigator. Alright, as you can see already, we have a system that is going to be quite well known to advanced users, and if not, it's going to be quite interesting to some others that have not experienced that era. You have a menu system that controls most of the features. Most applications used quite extensive menus and sub-menus in order to organize features. And in this case, as you notice, you have a lot of options being presented. And you also have indicators for fast functions. Fast functions are on the lower side of the screen at the bottom, where you can see that pressing each and every function key is going to launch a separate action. So editing a file, copying, renaming, creating a directory, and deleting. These are most of the commands you're going to use on a daily basis on a computer, and operations that you're still doing today. What is missing, of course, or what is not obviously visible, is how to launch applications. In general, in DOS, due to the fact that some applications didn't have the ability to open files, or sometimes you wouldn't have files that were stored in various folders, you would be resorting probably to launching the files from the DOS shells as they were required, one by one. So you would open a file, let's say that you wanted to edit this text file, and you would press F4, that would open the editor, and then you would edit your file, close the application, and move further with your activity. DOS Navigator was in many ways quite advanced, because I'm going to show you immediately one feature that we have over here, if it works, but I think that, let's see. Okay. So as you can notice over here, you can organize your screen area, and this was unheard of before such complex applications like file managers or DOS shells were available. And since you can move this window in and out of the way, you have a basic functionality that mimics what more advanced graphical user interfaces like Windows and others did. And in many ways, this was a massive increase in productivity, especially when you're thinking that using a graphical user interface is much more taxing for a system. So if you have a very old computer back then and it could only run, let's say, 286 applications, because it wasn't quite a fast processor, or it didn't have enough memory, then you would clearly use these applications and be much more productive in what you were trying to achieve. So this is quite a basic functionality that we take for granted today, but back then it was extremely important, and it was not a given that you would have this capability. So this was one of the most advanced DOS shells or file managers or complex applications to manage your computer, and I think it was quite interesting and efficient in what it did. On the other side, it also had some disadvantages, in the sense that the way in which it looked, the way in which other features were being implemented, perhaps was not the best it could have been. By comparison, and also the market share was not as high as, for instance, Norton Commander. But you have to take into account that it wasn't the case of a developer that had the same amount of resources, so some aspects should be forgiven. Alright, let's close this file. Unfortunately, if you look closely, you're going to notice that this is the menu for the main application for DOS Navigator, is not the one for the application. In some ways this can be confusing, and I think this is one of the letdowns or disadvantages of this implementation, because it doesn't make as clear as you would like how it operates. You see two menus. The second menu is from the application, yet you are not entirely sure if this is the way in which comments or the interface is being organized. Even if it's highlighted in blue over here and you see something else that resembles a menu, you don't have immediately the same connection you're making, particularly if you worked with Borland, developing applications like Borland Pascal or Borland C that were very popular in that time. And this application slightly mimics the same way in which it shows shortcuts to various features, like using red to signal the shortcut key to activate a particular menu. So you're using Alt and U in order to open the utility menu. So these are some disadvantages of in the way in which the application is being organized, and it's not quite obvious what you can do over here. And as you can see, just by pressing 2 times, I closed both windows, and it's obvious now that I have in front of me the screen that presents comments that were previously run. So let me see if I can show you the panels. I have to remember how to do so, so please bear with me. If I'm going to remember quick enough, I'm going to just restart the application, because this will, yes, unfortunately, I think I will do that, even if it should have been done in a different way. Anyway, so this is the basic way in which the application runs. If I want to make an operation, like, I don't know, copy a file, you can see another dialog box that has shown, and I have various options to make. However, if you look closely, you're going to notice some aspects that are not as well organized. You don't see the path where the file is going to be taken, although it's quite obvious that it's going to be on the left panel. For users that are not accustomed to this, it's not. And the way in which the application was created had many shortcomings that unfortunately were present also in future versions. If you want to have an idea of how old this application is, it's from 1999. However, even by 1999, there were different ways in which this behavior could have been improved. And I am sometimes surprised that such an application did not evolve to use graphical modes and have the features that would come from an advanced windowing system. However, this is the way in which the situation unfolded, and I assume that one of the reasons for the application not making this jump was the fact that the interest in using DOS has already waned by that time. So I think this shows very well what you can expect out of DOS Navigator. It has various other functions. It can format floppy disk drives. It has features like these kind of additional applications like a calculator and others. So it's quite an advanced application, and one that I think fares very well, but that is quite cumbersome to use in certain ways. And I think that this is the letdown in this scenario. But it's a very advanced application, and I wanted to show to you because many times when we are thinking about how to best organize and use our files when we are on a real or a virtual machine, we have to take into account those file manager. And another reason is, of course, that I have mentioned in a previous December episode, one that I think ran the previous year, that DOS Navigator was one of the shells or file managers that was a recommendation among others if you were attempting to use DOS in an effective way. And you can still find DOS Navigator on the internet. It has not been updated for a long time. You can find older or newer versions, However, if I were to make a recommendation, I think that these versions or versions that are not particularly newer are going to be a better bet than newer applications. And I'm going to show you immediately why I'm saying that. So I will look upon the newer DOS Navigator version. This is something akin to an open DOS Navigator, of course. DOS Navigator open source. It's from 2006. In some ways it could be considered an improvement, but I already see some things that are even less obvious. Of course, you can make the menu visible, permanently visible. However, the application takes much more, and I'm going to show you this. So 1.2 megabytes, and the previous version of DOS Navigator took just 700 kilobytes, so around 400 kilobytes less. I think the implementation is not bad in itself, but I am pretty sure that part of the functionality that was available is not, because as you can clearly see over here, it doesn't have screensavers. Of course, that doesn't matter because you would probably not be very interested in screensavers other than for nostalgia or in case you are interested about the history of the program. It doesn't have multiple color palettes, and I think there are some other features that are not entirely obviously missing. I'm not sure about the file compression capability, because in some ways this was not given in some applications, and I'm not entirely sure if it works properly, although I see this one as being a slightly more successful version, because there is also a DOS Navigator that includes or works with in the protected mode, and I think this one is the worst because in some ways it's even slower than this application, and it has an even less refined visual style without bringing anything substantial to the table. But however, if you don't want to use the older version of the application and you want to use a newer one, I think this one is the second best choice. But other than that, I think DOS Navigator 1.51 is enough for most purposes. You can see over here the example I wanted to make. Since there are so many different colors used for different files, it's sometimes annoying, or it doesn't help you as much in order to identify them. And this is a common issue I have noticed in most shells that get further and further from the simplicity of older file managers and try to make information much more obvious. Unfortunately, even if it makes information much more obvious, in this case it doesn't work that well, because when you see in that purplish text on a gray background, it's very hard to read. So I think this shows quite well what is the situation. Okay, I correct myself, you do have access to zip files, and probably you can unpack them. I will try to make, yes, of course, extract files. So I think that this version of DOS Navigator could be quite useful. Not entirely sure what kind of applications, what kind of DOS extensions you could use, and let me see if I can find more information about that. Archives. Okay, it seems to have support for quite a lot of archives, but I'm not entirely sure if you can unpack those, because the general perspective was that you would require different DOS applications in order to actually pack or unpack a specific files. So I'm not entirely sure if I can. Okay, so 7-zip is not supported, and I don't think you can readily see other files. I don't have a RAR file, but I'm not entirely sure if it works. Okay, you have the standard viewer. So probably if you have some situations where you want to use your files, DOS Navigator, the open source version, is the best bet, but not others that are just much more complex without bringing much to the table. Alright, so I think this went to show on quite well what you can expect out of DOS Navigator. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you very much for watching. I will also have more DOS shells and file managers in the following videos covered, so that you understand better what you can do with them and which one best suits your needs. So have a pleasant day.